It's 1999, and Japanese nuclear scientists Hisashi Ouchi, Masato Shinohara, and Yutaka Yokokawa are conducting routine work. Within seconds, two of those men would be doomed to die, and Hisashi Ouchi would receive the greatest dose of radiation any human being has ever experienced. The men are mixing together a batch of fuel to be used in a fast breeder reactor, a special type of nuclear reactor which can create more fissile material than it consumes. These reactors are typically used to aid in nuclear research, as they can very quickly and efficiently create large quantities of nuclear material to fuel conventional reactors. The men are experienced nuclear scientists, but a series of miscalculations and outright mistakes would doom two of them to die the most horrible deaths one could imagine. Ouchi is standing next to a large metal tank, to which he's adding a mixture of various chemicals and 16 kilograms of uranium. Behind and above him, Shinohara stands on a platform overlooking the work, while 4 meters away, Yokokawa sits at a desk busying himself with paperwork. As Ouchi begins to pour the mixture into the precipitation tank, he doesn't realize that the tank has a maximum uranium limit of 2.4 kilograms. Ouchi dumps the entire mixture into the tank regardless, and as he does, he sets in motion one of the worst civilian nuclear accidents in history. The walls of the tank reflect neutrons being released by the uranium atoms, which causes the wayward neutrons to bounce back and strike other uranium atoms and split them, releasing even more neutrons. Under a normal uranium limit, not enough uranium atoms are present to sustain a nuclear chemical reaction. But Ouchi has just unknowingly dumped so much uranium into the tanks that within nanoseconds, the precipitation tank becomes a fully working nuclear reactor. Almost as soon as Ouchi finished pouring the fuel mixture, there's a blinding flash of blue light caused by the emission of Cherenkov radiation. The men stagger backwards, blinded and dazed as the gamma radiation alarms begin blaring. Ouchi is blasted with an incredible 17 sieverts of radiation, or a whopping 300 times the annual dose allowed for nuclear plant engineers, and more than twice what's believed to be a lethal dose. Ouchi has just been bombarded with as much radiation as if he'd been standing at the center of an atomic explosion. Masato is further away, but he still receives an incredible 10 sieverts of radiation, guaranteeing his death. Yutaka, who is 4 meters away, however, only receives a 3 sievert dose, 5 below the lethal limit. Ouchi, though, will suffer a fate no human being in history has ever experienced. As the radiation tears through his body, it completely destroys all of his chromosomes, making him the only human being ever to live with no DNA in his body. The radiation almost completely destroys all of his white blood cells and covers most of his body in third-degree burns. The radiation is so intense that it even burns the skin on the side of his body facing away from the tank. Ouchi is so disoriented by the radioactive blast that he immediately vomits into the precipitation tank and then manages to stagger backwards. Helping each other, the three men barely manage to stumble into the decontamination chamber, where Ouchi immediately passes out. The men are rushed to the local hospital, and treatment begins to try and save their lives. Ouchi is in critical condition and is flown to a better-equipped hospital in the Chiba prefecture. By the time he gets there, his skin is almost completely fallen off his body, and with no skin, any fluids he receives quickly leak out from his pores. Just to keep him hydrated, Ouchi has to be given fluids by IV 24/7, with the majority of those fluids simply leaking out of his body and soaking the bed. The doctors treating Ouchi know that he will not survive. No living being could possibly survive the radiation dose he just suffered. They make a controversial decision, though, and decide that whether Ouchi likes it or not, he is now going to serve as a guinea pig for treating radiation illness. This is, after all, a once-in-a-lifetime medical opportunity. To try and restore his white blood cells, he's given a transplant from his sister, who is a willing donor. At first, this seems to work, and Ouchi's white blood cell count starts to recover. However, his body is so poisoned by radiation that his own flesh destroys the new white blood cells. Completely helpless to infection, Ouchi is quarantined and sealed off from the world in a special suite. During this time, Ouchi fades in and out of consciousness. 5 days after the accident, he comes to. His wife is able to see him briefly, and blood is leaking from his eyes. He begs the doctors to let him die. He doesn't want to live in pain anymore. He tells them that he's not a guinea pig. The doctors respond by putting him into a medical coma. Their experiments are not over, and the doctors pump blood into Ouchi just as fast as he's losing it. He receives as much as 24 transfusions a day, and desperate for results, the medical team treating him begin to use drugs imported from all around the world. But his body is so damaged by radiation, they have no effect. 27 days after the accident, Ouchi's body begins to disintegrate from the inside out. He's been unable to regrow new skin, and in a bid to keep him from losing liquids through his body's pores, he's been wrapped in linen bandages. Daily skin transplants are being done, yet the transplants simply won't take and slough off. The muscles of his body start to peel off his bones. Inside his body, his organs begin to simply come apart as Ouchi liquefies from the inside out. At this point, Ouchi is nothing more than a skeleton with a few inches of flesh attached to it. His body has decomposed so much that his right foot has simply fallen off right below the knee joint. 59 days into the ordeal, Ouchi's heart stops, and yet the doctors resuscitate him 3 times over the course of 49 minutes. This severely damages his brain, which is likely a mercy. Ouchi is likely too brain damaged to regain consciousness again. Finally, on December 21, 1999, Ouchi dies of organ failure, his body simply unable to continue the basic processes of life despite being put on life support. Shinohara would last 4 months more than Ouchi, and was even thought to be recovering. On New Year's Day, he was able to visit the hospital gardens with the assistance of a wheelchair. However, the radiation had damaged him too severely, and slowly his own body began the process of shutting down. In February, he contracted pneumonia, and because of the damage done to his lungs by the radiation, he was unable to breathe on his own. The doctors hooked him up to a ventilator, taking away his ability to speak. Shinohara was forced to resort to writing messages on a pad of paper to his nurses and his family. But as time went on, he grew weaker and weaker. Finally, on April 27th, Shinohara too died of multiple organ failure, the radiation claiming him as well. One of his last messages, scrawled on the hospital notepad, was simply, "Mommy, please." Yokokawa would go on to make a recovery, and 6 months after the incident was released to recover at home. However, a year later, an official investigation would charge him and 5 others with criminal negligence in the incident. Public anger would lead to major reforms of the facility, as it was revealed that the experimental plant routinely cut corners and ignored safety rules. For Ouchi though, the man who suffered the greatest radiation dose in history, those changes would come far too late.